What is the critical constraint related to the region of an Azure virtual network and the resources within it? All resources that lie within a virtual network must be placed in the same region as the virtual network itself. Why is it crucial to map out IP address ranges when creating a virtual network that will connect to an on-premise environment? It is crucial because virtual networks in Azure cannot have overlapping IP addressing with connected networks. What standard, also known as a set of non-routable IP addresses, is recommended for use in private network environments like Azure VNets? The RFC 1918 standard is recommended for private IP addresses. What is the first private IP address range defined by RFC 1918, which starts with 10? The first range is 10.0/8 from 10.0.0.0 to 10.255.255.255. What is the second private IP address range defined by RFC, which starts with 172? The second range is 172.16.0.0/12, ranging from 172.16.0.0 to 172.31.255.255. What is the third private IP address range defined by RFC 1918, which starts with 192.168? The third range is 192.168.0.0/16, ranging from 192.168.0.0 to 192.168.5.255. In Azure, what is the cost associated with using private IP addresses from the RFC 1918 ranges? Private IP addresses come at no cost. What is a public IP address required for a resource in Azure? A public IP address is required when a resource needs to connect directly to the internet. What is the cost implication of assigning a public IP address to in Azure? Assigning a public IP address to a resource comes at an added cost. A subnet with a /24 prefix like 10.0.1.0/24 contains how many total IP addresses? A /24 subnet contains a total of 256 addresses from 0 to 255. In any standard network range, which two addresses are typically unusable? The very first address, network identity, and the very last address, broadcast address, are unusable. In an Azure subnet, how many IP addresses are reserved by the platform for its own use? Azure reserves 5 IP addresses in every subnet. In an Azure subnet, what is the fast reserved IP address like x.x.x.0? The first address is reserved for the network identity. In Azure subnet, what is the purpose of the second reserved IP address like x.x.x.1? The second address is reserved for the default gateway for the subnet. In an Azure subnet, what are the purposes of the third and the fourth reserved IP addresses? For example, x.x.x.2 and x.x.x.3. The third and fourth addresses are used by Azure DNS. In Azure subnet, what is the purpose of the last reserved IP address, that is x.x.x.255? The last address is reserved as the broadcast address for the network range. Given a /24 subnet in Azure, which has 256 total addresses, how many are available for you to assign to resources? There are 251 available addresses, 256 total, 5 reserved by Azure. What are the 4 basic details required when creating almost any resource in the Azure environment? You must provide a subscription, a resource group, a unique name for the resource, and a region. If you are creating a new VNet and the Azure portal warns you that the chosen IP address prefix overlaps with an existing VNet, what is the long-term implication if you proceed? If you proceed, communication will never be possible between the two virtual networks with overlapping IP addresses. A VNet address space of 10.9.0.0/16 provides a maximum of how many IP addresses? A /16 address space provides a maximum of 65,536 addresses. What does Azure require you to create within a virtual network before you can place any resources like a virtual machine inside it? Azure requires you to have at least one subnet within the virtual network. Is it possible to create an Azure virtual network without defining any subnets during the initial setup? Yes, but you will be forced to create a subnet later before you can place any resources within that virtual network. Network administrators often reduce the size of subnets, like from /24 to a smaller range to -IP addresses to conserve IP addresses. What feature in Azure allows you to add metadata to resources for organization, billing, and management? Tags allow you to add metadata to resources. After a virtual network is created, Where can you view its configured IP address spaces in the Azure portal? You can view the configured address spaces under the address space setting on the virtual network's blade. Under what condition are you no longer able to amend the address range of an Azure virtual network? You can no longer amend once resources within the VNet subnets start consuming IP addresses. What must you do before you can change the primary address range of a VNet that already contains active resources? You must remove all resources from the subnets within that address range before you can change it. In the Azure portal, the Connected Devices tab on a virtual network blade shows what information? It shows all devices part of the virtual network, the subnet they belong to, the current IP address. Where in the Azure portal for a virtual network can you see the number of available IP addresses remaining in a subnet? You can see the number of available IP addresses on the subnets tab. When you request a public IP address from Azure, can you reserve a specific IP address that you provide? No, you cannot reserve a specific IP address. Azure allocates one that is available at the time of the request. What is the only SKU stock keeping unit currently available for new public IP addresses in Azure as of March 2020? The standard SKU is the only one available for new public IP addresses. Public IP addresses created with the standard SKU in Azure can only be configured with what type of allocation? They can only use static IP address allocation. What routing preference option for a public IP address involves Microsoft using its backbone network to get traffic as close as possible to the end user? The Microsoft network routing preference uses the Microsoft backbone. Can the routing preference for an Azure public address Microsoft network versus internet be changed? IP address has been created? No, the routing preference must be chosen at creation and cannot be changed later. An unassociated public IP address is a public IP that has been created but not yet assigned to a specific resource. What is the primary function of Azure Bastion which can be configured during VNet creation? Azure Bastion provides secure RDP and SSH to virtual machines directly in the Azure portal without needing a public IP on the VM. What security feature can be enabled during VNet creation to provide enhanced protection against large-scale network attacks? DDoS network protection can be enabled for enhanced protection. A CIDR notation of /24 means that the first dash octets or 24 bits of the IP address define the network portion. 3 octets. If two virtual networks have overlapping IP address ranges, what must be done to enable communication between them? One of the virtual networks must be reconfigured with a non-overlapping IP address range, which may require deleting and recreating resources. Thanks for watching.